Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me again. Today, I want to offer you a book review, along with a broader picture of what this book is about, and the current military culture behind the Trump-Miller immigration policy taking place everywhere in the country. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit, while I try to paint a picture of a military culture in the United States going back decades that few realize has been going on right under your noses. I recently read a new nonfiction book written by a senior NBC journalist who normally covers immigration issues. She was interviewed on MS Now a few weeks ago, and the book sounded interesting given the times we're living in right now. You have to understand, I rarely read nonfiction for any reason. I have found that some of these hastily written books rarely live up to their hype, and this was no exception. I paid way too much for the book that didn't have enough substance about everything that's been in the news around the world for months regarding ICE roundups and concentration camps. So let me bring this book up. Now I got what I got here is the Amazon page that where you can get it if you really want to read it. And that's where I got it. So what this book did cover was the lead up to Trump's immigration plan and the beginning chaos to get the plan implemented without any money after Trump won the election in 2024, and the actual attempt to get things rolling in 2025. One of the things a lot of people fail to understand about Trump is that he gets these crazy ideas from other people, and he tries to use them to satisfy his voting bloc. He rarely has an original idea of his own. In this case, this idea of deporting millions of undocumented immigrants quickly from the United States without a real plan on how to do it. It wasn't his idea to tackle this the way in the first place. All he knew was that getting rid of, quote, the worst of the worst undocumented criminals resonated hard with the MAGA voters, so he went with it during the campaign Trump speeches to get himself elected. He promised a lot of other things too that he has since reneged on, but this podcast episode is about the immigration disaster unfolding across the country right now. Enter Stephen Miller, the architect of the family separation policies and likely indirectly involved with the forced sterilization of immigrants during Trump's first term, and now he's being called the modern reincarnation of Nazi Germany's Heinrich Himmler, the SS Reichsfuhrer, who was the architect of the final solution, in quotes, program for all the Jews, POWs, and dissidents in all of the camps across Europe in World War II. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this book off here. And you know what? I am going to, just to give you an idea what this looks like, I am going to pull up a picture of this guy that we've been talking about. So here is the famous Heinrich Himmler, SS Reichsfuhrer. Now, the reason I pulled this up is to give you an idea of what he looks like, well, what he did look like back in the 1940s. All right, so now let's pull him down. So with the reports of the inhumane conditions in these camps coming out, despite heavy media repression by the DHS, the only things missing are the gas chambers and the crematoriums, that and firing squads and mass burials. Although I'm willing to bet that this was probably brought up as a solution dismissed, only because they knew they couldn't hide it. No one wants to end up in The Hague after Trump is gone. Getting back to the book, which let me pull that back up here. I was disappointed because I felt that the author published it too soon and left out what happened in Chicago and Minneapolis. She concentrated on the initial scrambling to get the mass deportation program started and the internal struggles to obey the Reichsfuhrer's orders, as he was near foaming at the mouth in his exhortations to his DHS people to obey his orders. Their orders are to round up and deport 1 million people a year or more, or they will all be fired and replaced with people who can get the job done. I'm paraphrasing this from her book. A lot of people have left, but as the author said, they've been quickly replaced with people who have no problem carrying out these orders, Tom Homan being at the top of the list. Then came the wannabe beauty queen, Kristi Noem from South Dakota, the former governor that few liked there, so I heard. If you want to know more about all this internal warfare between these characters happening behind the scenes at DHS last year, read this book. My focus today is to talk about the broader picture here. As I said earlier, all Trump cares about is his image and name brand, about how much money he can make from that, regardless whether he's president of the United States or not. If you haven't figured it out by now, Trump is using the office of the U.S. presidency to rake in as much money as possible because he stupidly thinks he has absolute immunity from any kind of prosecution as long as he's president. What he fails to understand is that's not true. He cannot brazenly commit crimes like any other common criminal. The only reason he hasn't been charged so far is because of the Republican Congress and Senate that he thinks he owns, like a mafia boss. That's starting to change this year. He's getting ready to find out that he might not own as many Republicans as he thinks he does, especially if the Democrats win the Congress next fall. As far as his book is concerned, it's been hyped a lot because it was picked up by a well-known publishing house, and because of all the hype and marketing, it was propelled to the Amazon bestseller list. He inflated the price to make it seem like it's something special, but it's not, truthfully. At least I didn't think so anyway. It does give the reader a sense of outrage about all the behind-the-scenes chaos of Miller's final solution policy that he's been trying to implement, with lots of failures to date. But that's where it leaves off. When I finished reading the book, my first question was, where's the rest? Is there a sequel coming out? I don't know, but not writing about Chicago, and more importantly, nothing about Minneapolis, Memphis, Charlotte, North Carolina, New Orleans, or so many other surges across the country through the winter months, leaves me asking, why did I pay so much money for an incomplete story? So let's talk about the ICE paramilitary soldiers a little bit. First, I want to go back in time to the late 1960s and 1970s to talk about all the veterans who have been returning home from America's wars since then, with the weight of being the losers in all these wars, and then only to learn later on that there was no idealism for being there in the first place. We were only there to make money for the defense contractors in Vietnam after LBJ and McNamara decided to start sending in more troops to fight communism. The same can be said for all the wars since. LBJ and his people learned that China and Russia were supplying military equipment on a small scale to North Vietnam, small arms and ammunition. And that was all they needed to open the doors to corruption. And Tricky Dick Nixon was only too happy to get in there with his hand out once he got elected, like a lot of other politicians of the day. We lost over 56,000 military members in Vietnam, and that doesn't include the Australians, Canadians, and others who were kind enough to help out. For the rest of us who came home, there was a stigma about us because of the reporters who videoed the war crimes and other atrocities committed by the South Vietnamese and Western soldiers on the poor villagers around the countrysides in both Vietnam's, Laos, and Cambodia. My Lai in 1968 was just the loudest one that finally made the news in 1969 after the Pentagon and Nixon's government tried so hard to cover it up. The derogatory label baby killer given to a lot of us back then didn't sit well with a lot of young, highly trained soldiers. For a lot of us who came back with undiagnosed PTSD, who never got the help we needed to adjust back into normal society, this just made things worse. A lot of young men got into trouble with the law and joined groups like various white supremacists to try and find anyone to accept them as they were, broken and otherwise. Through the years of America's losing wars, a lot more of these young men return home with mental health issues that were never addressed. Because in the U.S. military, you're perceived as weak and were singled out for punishment. If you dare tell someone in your chain of command that you thought you might have a mental health issue and needed to talk to a professional. I know because I saw this for myself during my career. I didn't know I was carrying a lot of leftover mental baggage from my own trips to war zones. What I did know from watching others get punished was that I didn't want to end up like them. So I kept my mouth shut and struggled along, like so many others. If you were to count all of the young and not so young soldiers who came back from all these wars we lost going back decades, who never received the proper health care we were promised by our government, that's a lot of angry former soldiers running around in our civilian society, just looking for something to take out our anger on. Some of them have made the news over the years, mostly by getting in trouble with law enforcement. Some will remember, like Timothy McVeigh of the Oklahoma bombing fame. He was an angry Desert Storm veteran. There have been a lot more through the years. A lot of you may know a veteran or two who may have had some trouble with your local law enforcement where you live at one time or another through the last 40 years or so. I know I had my own share of run-ins with my local police during the first years after I returned home to Caribou, Maine, right after I left active duty. All minor stuff because my anger was always just below the surface, waiting to be scratched open by the slightest thing. And people being people, combat veterans never lack for running into stupid people who think they can take advantage of someone else's misery. Imagine this same feeling and attitude amongst thousands of veterans across the country. We're angry about learning that our government lied to us about so many things, that we got hurt, both physically and mentally, during our volunteer service, not to defend the American people from enemies, but to pursue profitable agendas for the wealthy owners of the military-industrial complex, only to return home be stonewalled about applying for our VA benefits in a lot of cases, either by not telling some of us or by making it very hard to get those medical benefits from the state VA hospitals. I know I've struggled for many years to get the medical help I've been asking for since I was still on active duty. All of that frustration builds up and needs an outlet. Some join law enforcement and succeed in finding a worthwhile career. Others join law enforcement and fail out because their skill sets are different than what's required for civilian law enforcement, and they can't manage to retrain. In some ways, it's like a step down for a lot of highly trained infantry soldiers, and it feels to some like a demotion and punishment when they can't use their military training. Some of them end up getting fired for too many complaints of excessive use of force during arrests and the handling of protesters. Others struggle with PTSD and end up with drug and alcohol problems, especially those with easy access to drugs and a little loose cash from crime scenes. Then along comes someone like Stephen Miller, infused with a bunch of federal tax money after Trump bullied Congress into padding the big bad bill last fall. I'm sure you've all heard the stories by now about the big hiring fair DHS has had going on since last fall after they received all that money. ICE put out the word that they're offering hiring bonuses and other benefits for qualified people to become ICE agents. That word qualified is the scary part. The lure of easy money for veterans looking for work is hard to walk away from. There have been stories last year of municipal police departments complaining to their county and state governments that ICE was poaching their officers with the appeal of much larger salaries and bonuses. Preferred qualifications? A background in law enforcement and or ex-military. As we witnessed in LA, Chicago, and Minneapolis starting last summer, and some of the stories I heard coming out of Memphis, Tennessee during that ICE surge begs the question, just who exactly did they hire? Let me tell you what I learned from both Julia Ainsley's book and news stories from around the country over the last several months. DHS and ICE hired anyone, I mean anyone, who showed up with a resume that had law enforcement experience or military experience or both and could make it through their abbreviated 47-day school. From what I heard, the school is a joke compared to normal state police academies and just regular Army basic training. So now we have a bunch of ex-police. A lot of them were rejects from other law enforcement outfits for abuse of power and use of excessive force, and former soldiers looking for work, which is why 2 people were murdered in Minneapolis back in January, which is why we have so many reports of human rights violations at these so-called detention centers. ICE and the private companies contracted by ICE to run the camps want the cruelty as a deterrent to the migrants around the world. It's working. A lot of the people being rounded up are self-deporting when given the chance, rather than be subjected to the abuse and torture being dished out by these people purposely hired for their thuggish personalities and willingness to inflict pain and abuse without remorse, and will follow orders without a conscience. The ICE field agents are cut from the same cloth. I read that above and beyond their law enforcement and military training, if they even have that, they're also hired for their lack of empathy towards immigrants, an attitude of loyalty to the people who hired them to do a job rather than to the laws of the land, and a propensity for violence. Not all of them are like that, but for those who may have a conscience or want to uphold the law, they've been quickly moved out of the field and been either fired or moved to lesser positions within the organization. There have been exceptions, as we saw after the PR disaster in Minneapolis last winter. Their poster boy for paramilitary soldiers, Greg Bovino, was finally fired after all the public backlash, sent back to Southern California and forced to retire. Although I read in the news, he's appealing that so he can go back to doing what he does best, abusing immigrants and sexually harassing women. Since all the furor over what happened in Chicago and Minneapolis, especially after the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in January, ICE has adopted a different strategy. But the soldiers and attitudes are still there. To give you an idea what that looks like, take a look at the recent news coming from the Delaney Detention Center in Newark, New Jersey. It got so bad there, the new governor had to step in and tell ICE to stay inside the detention facility while she deployed state and city police to handle protesters. The mayor of Newark, New Jersey, set a curfew that applies to everyone, not just protesters. This is happening all over the country still. DHS is just working harder to maintain a much lower profile with limited success. The roundups are still happening in large numbers all over the country. The camps are all overcrowded, and the internees are being made to work as prison labor to increase the profits of the private prison contractors. I watched the MS News segment last Sunday where they reported that these internees are being made to work like prison labor for $1.25 an hour while they're there. These private contractors are raking in billions of dollars now. What's a little slave labor amongst friends, right? Remember, it's been documented that over 70% of these people being rounded up have no criminal records beyond crossing the border without authorization, which is a federal misdemeanor for first-time offenders, if they have no priors anywhere else. Basically, a step above city jaywalking. Yet they're all being treated like hardened criminals doing time for federal crimes, such as bank robbery and murder. But as I said before, this is on purpose. Miller wants to scare the whole world from daring to try and cross the U.S. border without a visa, which visas are now extremely hard to get, unless you have a briefcase full of cash to pay for one of Trump's golden visas, or are a white South Afrikaner. Doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, unless you have enough money to bribe Trump or one of his immediate family members and close friends. If you are in the U.S. and cannot prove your legal status at any given time when they ask you, or you let it lapse, or you accidentally had a typo on an application in the past that technically for a brief moment in time you were illegal for so much as an hour or a day, you may very well end up on the list of targeted enforcements and rounded up for deportation and put in a camp. Just ask that young Canadian woman who ended up in a detention center for 2 weeks last year because someone made a typo on a visa application and she was technically illegal for a day until they sorted it out. She finally managed to contact a friend and a lawyer in order to buy her way out and was deported. There have been so many others over the last year and a half, and the list gets longer every week. Skin color has little to do with it. You're not a white, native-born American. You're a target. To add more misery to all this, as most of us know, America is a deeply divided country. We're divided over religious ideology, political ideology, to a lesser degree, cultural differences dating back to when the Americas was still a crown colony. Trump and Miller are using those differences to keep a big wedge between us in order to complete the mission. Some would argue that the mission objectives are spelled out in that Project 2025 program, and others think it's all about keeping the Republicans in power at any cost. The fact that I'm saying this shows you part of that divide. It's on purpose. Keep us divided. Use it against us to stay in power. I have a news story to end that should scare all would-be protesters, depending on where they protest. Last June, at the height of the West Coast ICE protest, a bunch of people were arrested outside of a detention center in Washington State. Why this matters goes back to what I just said about how deeply divided the country is. 3 of the protesters, one of them a decorated Army sergeant of Southwestern Asian descent, whose father is also a decorated U.S. Army officer, have been convicted by a jury of charges relating to obstructing a federal officer in the performance of his duties and a bunch of other trumped-up charges. No pun intended. So let me pull that article up for you. The problem with that is geography and demographics as it pertains to the United States. Let me explain. These 3 activists were convicted in a court in eastern Washington State, which, along with eastern Oregon and extreme eastern California, have a group of wannabe separatists that want to secede from these 3 states, and along with Idaho, to form their own state or territory, depending on who you ask out there. A while back, they even had a California Republican state representative from one of the northeastern districts side with these nut jobs. This all went nowhere at the time, but these are the same kind of people who made up the jury that just convicted these 3 protesters. They are mostly all deep red Trump supporters and very pro-ICE, which means that if you decide to peacefully protest inside of a detention center in a region with a majority deep red conservative population, you better do your homework and find out just what kind of people live around the area in case they need a jury pool. They just might be pro-ICE supporters, and anything can happen, as we're seeing right now. As for this story, it's not over yet because the defendants' lawyers are appealing, so there might be some hope for them yet. The same goes for that U.S. representative from New Jersey who Trump's DOJ is trying to claim she impeded and assaulted a federal officer outside of the Lindy Detention Center last year. Her lawyers are working to dismiss all charges still. I saw the video when Zateo aired it last year, and the DOJ doesn't appear to have much of a case, but that doesn't mean much these days. But that's not the point. Fear is the point of all this. Stephen Miller wants to instill fear in everyone, everywhere, just like his SS predecessor, Heinrich Himmler. I wonder if he has his own private Nazi-style uniform to wear around his house when no one's watching. Can't you just see it? Miller preening in front of a mirror at his house when he's not home in a stiff military uniform with SS tabs on the collar, the skull on his hat. I saw an AI-generated image on Facebook a few days ago with him looking over the shoulder of Heinrich Himmler, which is where I got the whole idea. The caption was about the obvious corollaries between the two. So here's my version of that image. I tried to splice them together, but I'm no expert, as you can see. I found it. Well, like I said, it's a pretty poor excuse for a splice. Far as that goes. But as you can see, Trump is definitely no Adolf Hitler. Maybe a Hermann Göring, sort of. Although you won't ever catch Trump flying on an airplane, much less drive his own car. So maybe not. But still, the United States is a very troubled nation as far as the people are concerned. We have a lot of very angry people living here with access to a lot of guns. Add into that mix a lot of angry veterans with a grievance toward the government for the way we've been treated after giving a lot to our country out of a sense of honor and duty to serve. Some of us have gone to the dark side and are hanging out with groups that make them feel accepted and useful again. And so I'm going to pull up this last little thing I've got here. I picked up this article from Chris Hedges. This is an interview that he did here last week. Now, as I was saying, those are the ones that we all need to watch out for, as some of them have been hired by Stephen Miller to go after anyone he says go after, and there are a few rules. But even that is starting to change. Minnesota just arrested and is extraditing an ICE agent from Texas to answer for state crimes committed in Minnesota. He's not one of the ones that murdered Miss Good or Mr. Pretty, but maybe we just need to be more patient, and their time will come. There's no statute of limitations for murder. Let's hope so, as they definitely need some justice for their murders. Now, the same can be the same for some of the other ICE agents who committed obvious state crimes in other jurisdictions. Maybe we just have to be patient and wait for some of these states to build their cases before they drop the hammer. I don't know about you, but I'm a little short on patience with all of this these days. As an old soldier, I want to see some action on the battlefield. I want to see more of these wannabe federal agents who have and still are brutalizing and dehumanizing ordinary people held to account in the courts now, not years from now. They should not be allowed to commit crimes against immigrants just because the government declared undocumented people enemy combatants within the borders of the United States. Can you imagine someone in your chain of command telling you that a minor child, a pregnant mother, or a senior citizen in a wheelchair is now an enemy combatant and they must be treated as such? How is that not a war crime, or at least a crime against humanity? Anyone ordering troops to commit these crimes should be arrested and tried in international court. But then the most famous is famous for not handing over famous political figures for war crimes at the ICC. Lest we forget, countries like the United States and Britain are excluded from international law when it comes to war crimes and crimes against humanity. They get to do whatever they want, wherever they want, and no one can hold them accountable. They've been doing it for hundreds of years, and no one has dared hold them to account yet. At least not in a court of law, anyways. Presidents like Nixon, Reagan, Clinton, Obama, the Bush family, and Trump will never see the inside of the international court. And they've been directly or indirectly responsible for more deaths than the Nazis and Japanese ever were. And look at what their convicted work, and look to their convicted war criminals, what we did to their war criminals at the end of World War II. By treating the U.S. like a pariah state economically, we may be seeing that happen as we speak, but that's a topic for another day. This may be part of the reason we're seeing so much aggression from some of these ICE agents assigned to run around grabbing people and stand guard around the detention centers. The higher-ups know who the ground pounders are and who the NCOs are. The ground pounders get to stand guard at the gates and on the roofs, while the NCOs are taking the orders and making the battle plans to defend the base and chase the enemy combatants in the streets. The junior enlisted can be relied on to exert aggressive force when ordered, much like a private PFC or a corporal, without anyone asking any questions, which is why ICE is recruiting so many former soldiers. The new work culture is a perfect fit for guys and some girls who are used to sharing foxholes and working in stressful close confines together. So what if they behave like combat soldiers who've been trained in some of the world's best combat schools, may even have actual combat experience? Who best to scare immigrants and have them pass the word around all over the poorest countries of the world? Estados Unidos is no longer the welcoming country anymore for those seeking asylum and a better life. In fact, it's likely as bad or worse than the country they're leaving from, which suits people like Stephen Miller and so many others like him just fine. Project 2025's new U.S. immigration advertising slogan from now on should be, "Welcome to the United States. and I'm going to pull up something I did create here for you. I'm actually going to blow this up so you can see it. I created this on Canva. Welcome to the United States. Only white Afrikaners are allowed to immigrate. Exceptions made for white, wealthy Europeans on a case-by-case basis only. All others need not apply. Warning, visiting may be hazardous to your health. Enjoy your stay. I added a skull and crossbones in the top corners of the sign to give you an idea of what I'm thinking here. I could see them hanging this sign at every airport customs entry point and border highway gateway entrance in the United States as a warning to the world. This is the new immigration policy under Donald J. Trump, CEO of the new United States. And don't you forget it. If you should happen to make a mistake, we have a spot in one of our new nice detention centers waiting for you as we prepare to deport you to wherever we want in the world. The more dangerous for you, the better for us. I bet Trump and his Reichstag would have orgasms over something like this. So that's it for the day. I hope I brought you a bit of a smile and some things to think about once again this week. It's time for my break. When I return, I have another one of my old articles about Irish mythological history that I want to read to you about the famous Irish warrior Finn McCool. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of him. During this break, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support this podcast. One way is to become a paid subscriber on my Substack page, which I'll pull up here for you to look at. You can also find the Village Oak Tree on medium.com. And again on YouTube. This is my YouTube channel page, where you can like and subscribe there as well. This podcast is also available in mobile audio podcasts all over the world, such as RSS, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. The best way is to make a donation using my donations page on my website at crowntobeha.com. You can visit using the QR code in the top left of this video. I also accept donations of any amount and most currencies around the world using Stripe. Website address is also listed in the scrolling banner at the bottom of your screen. If you're listening to an audio version of the podcast and one of the many mobile apps available, use the link in the podcast description. I've made the website more mobile friendly, so go check it out. I hope people watching or listening to this podcast or just reading the commentary on Substack or Medium.com will take a moment to come visit me at crowntobeha.com. I might even have something you like and you want to come back for more. Sláinte. Welcome back. All right, so let me read this story. So when I wrote these stories, and I'm still writing a few of them now and again, I write them in both Irish and English. So a lot of this stuff you'll see in both languages. And in this case, the title is Fenagú an Fianna, which is basically a story about Finn McCool. So this is short. I've got some short stories about Finn McCool interspersed with a little Irish history. Finn McCool was the greatest warrior and famed leader of the warriors of the Fianna in his time. The Fianna were a group of mercenaries that traveled around Erin in the 3rd century AD. The adventures they had were recorded in the Fenian cycles. Stories about how Finn became the leader of the Fianna and variations can be found all over the internet. There, you can see as I was talking about. It's written in both Irish and English. So as I was saying, after Finn finished his education with the famous Druid Angus, he decided to find his uncle Gall MacMorna, who happened to be the current leader of the Fianna at the time. Finn found his uncle living with the remnants of his clan in the woods where they hunted and kept a low profile after Finn's father had been killed. Finn had gained the wisdom of the salmon of knowledge when he studied under the Druid and poet Finnegas. Finn had accidentally burnt his thumb on the cooking fish, which he helped catch from the River Boyne, and gained the salmon's wisdom with that taste. Once the druid learned of that, he gave the rest of the fish to the young boy, which gave Finn extraordinary powers of knowledge. Finn used his knowledge gained from that fish by sucking on that thumb to find his uncle and clan, and was warmly welcomed as kin. As a gift to Finn for allowing as a gift to the Fianna for allowing him to stay, Finn gave them the Corbeau crane skin bag, a magic bag of weapons that he had taken from Le Locre in a previous encounter after Finn had killed him. The bag had originally belonged to Finn's father, who had been killed by Le. Because he had defeated Le Locre to get the bag, the Fianna remnants decided that Finn needed to be the new leader and present him to the Ard Righ, the High King, Cormac MacArt. So they set off to Tara and meet. When they arrived, it was the time of the Samhain festival. It just so happened that there was a Shay fire breather that had been wreaking havoc on the Hall of Tara for the last 23 years at Samhain. This was the time of year when the veils between the worlds were at their thinnest. The Shay, by the name of Ellen MacMidna, would leave his fairy mound and lull the inhabitants of Tara to sleep with a song, and set fire to the hall and burn it down. Finn decided that since he was here and had such heroic thoughts, he would dispatch the Shay and save the king and all his people at Tara. He had already heard about this, so he knew he had to figure out a way to stay awake once the Shay arrived. He did this by putting the point of his spear under his chin, so that when he nodded off standing guard, his chin would prick itself on the spear and wake him up. As he stood guard that night, he first heard the eerie song of sweetness, and all the other men fell asleep with it except Finn. As he watched, he saw the Shay mound opened up, and the magical creature stepped out, singing the song with a fiery breath. As the creature approached the Hall of Tara, Finn wrapped his cloak around the creature's head and fought with him until he could take his head. The story goes on to say that Finn saw that the door to the mound was closing, so he stuck his hand in to try and stop it, but got his thumb stuck and had a hard time removing it. When everyone woke up, they found that Finn had killed the Shay, and the hall wasn't burning down around them. Because Finn was now a great hero, the king praised him for his feats, and he was named leader of the Fianna. After he became their leader, the Fianna went out and about the land of Erin, performing heroic deeds and protecting the land from invaders and evildoers. His deeds were told and written down in the Fenian cycles and were largely exaggerated, as in most heroic stories, such as the story of him and the giant causeway to Scotland. He wasn't a really great person like how American superheroes are depicted in Marvel comics and movies, who can do no wrong. In another story, Finn deliberately let young Diarmid die because he had run off with a young woman promised him marriage to Finn McCool in his later years. The story goes that Finn was killed during a dispute between two provincial kings over tax evasion. The king of Munster owed taxes to the king of Leinster, who had raised an army from all the other three provinces. Finn was reputed to be of decent age by this time, as one of his grandsons was also killed in the battle. There are a handful of these stories told in the Fenian cycles, which anyone can find and read about. There are more modern-day authors like Morgan Llewellyn, who wrote a fictional book titled Finn McCool. She writes a story about himself and Queen Maeve of Connaught. It is a wonderful book that I read a long time ago. Now resides on my second son's bookshelves, so he can read it to his son. There are many others out there that if someone was interested to read more about Finn McCool, I recommend them for anyone interested in ancient Irish history. The two most famous ancient heroes are Finn McCool and Cú Chulainn from the Ulster cycles, which I wrote about in a previous article. Ireland has a lot of famous heroes from the modern centuries as well, most famous because they dared to rebel against the English and lost until 1936. Even that wasn't a complete victory, but that is a story for another day. Maybe I'll write something about the Easter Rising of 1960 someday. There were a lot of heroes back then, men like Michael Collins, Eamon de Valera, Patrick Pearse, and so many others. One of my famous ancestors are Ruadh O'Donnell in English, Terrance Ó Domhnaill, a famous clan chieftain from the 16th century who led the 9 Years' War against the English. A valiant try, but to no avail. Such has been the history of Erin since the days of the Furbolg. Constant invasions by other Celt tribes, the Danes and the English, who abused them the most. I can tell you quite a few personal stories of my own regarding my interactions with the British around the world, and most of them are good. I leave you with an Irish blessing and many happy readings into the land of the Shay and Irish freedom fighters, many of whom are still waging battle against British colonialism to this day, only on the political front now. I've been supporting the efforts of the Sinn Féin for many years, as much as I can get away with from across the way. The American government takes a dim view of active supporters here. May the road rise up to meet you. May the road rise up to meet your feet as you walk down the lane. May the sun shine down on your head and warm you as you go. And may the English die of pox and plague while you whistle a tune called the Four Green Fields on your way to a meeting with the local IRA. Now that's my story that I wrote several years ago. I hope you enjoy it. Gurima Hagen, thank you for listening and watching the show today. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. As I say goodbye this week, I will leave you with this quote from the famous Pulitzer Prize winning author and historian, Oscar Handlin. Quote, once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America. Then I discovered that the immigrants were American history. Slán go foill.